Welcome to another episode of Rich Politics. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. We've got so much to talk about tonight. But before I introduce our guest tonight, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. That's right, and the little bell so we can tell you when the next episodes are. Well, his career started both in the UK and, of course, European parliaments. But he also was very successful in leading the Vote Leave campaign here in Wales. He's also I think he's the director, or he runs at least, Centre for Welsh Studies, and he joins me now, Matthew MacKinnon. Matthew, good evening and welcome to Rich Politics.
Richard, how are you? All well?
Really well, mate. Really well. Well, you're not too far away from me, actually. You're just down the road, aren't you? You're in Wales.
Only about 20 miles away, but we're under lockdown. So
we are in the lockdown, unfortunately. We might come to that a little bit later, Matt, to be honest with you. But Matthew, yeah, tell us a little bit about what you do. Centre for Welsh Studies. I mean, I follow you on social media, and you've done some fantastic stuff. You've published so much stuff on there, actually, that I can't even think of all the stuff that you've done. But one of the things that sticks out for me is the way that you posted the videos on devolution, because a lot of people here in Wales, let's be honest, don't understand how devolution works. And you have pointed that out in those series of videos. But you do a lot more than that, don't you?
Yeah, no, we're quite a new think tank on the Welsh political scene. We launched in 2017 as a bit of a reaction, really, against the status quo that we saw developing in Wales since devolution sort of began in the late 90s. We are openly on the centre-right of Welsh politics. We believe the free market is the best way to ensure prosperity going forward for Wales. And we push for policies along that agenda. But as you said, we also do other things along the lines of our new series on devolution, where the final episode is coming out, I believe, next week. We've had hundreds of thousands of views on those videos across Wales, and we're pumping it out a lot more over the coming months into the Senedd elections. But I think it's all about education as well with the think tank. A lot of people, you know, from certain parts of the political left on social media, the nationalistic left, like to criticise us. They don't like the fact we're called the Centre for Welsh Studies. They think they own the language around words such as Wales and studies. And you know, we're here to stand up and say, you know, there is a voice here on the right that do want to work with people on the right of Welsh politics. We have a voice. We want to express it through academic reports, through social media campaigns, through video campaigns, and they're not going to stop us.
No, I find that, Matthew, because there's a lot of some of these groups out there, some of these other think tanks, so a lot more to the left, obviously we know, and they push a real kind of socialist agenda. A lot of them supporting independence, the Welsh nationalists in particular, like Nation Cymru is one of them. You know, I'm you know, that's those kind of groups out there, and they always seem to attack you guys. I've noticed that. You know, who funds you? And you know, Alan Davis, the MS for Blind Eye Gwent, constantly asking, who funds you? Who funds you, Matthew? Where does your money come from? I mean, how do you deal with these idiots, mate?
Well, to be honest, I think I need to take Alan out for a pint when I next see him. I mean, I don't think he's our biggest fan or the biggest fan of our organisation, but, you know, he's great for giving us exposure on social media. I mean, what a guy. But to be honest, Rich, we don't really listen to any of it. If we were to listen to it, it would just get us down. You know, these people are very vitriolic on social media. They're very vocal. They're a very small minority of the electorate, but they do like to get their points across on social media. As far as I'm concerned, you know, going forward, we've got a lot planned. And like you said, a lot of these organisations we will be showing in a report we've got coming out sometime in the very, very, very near future. It's meant to be out already, but we're going to be exposing a lot of charities in Wales who claim to be neutral, but they're fairly politicised charities, are taking big sums of money from the Welsh government and pretty much being propped up and almost nationalised as charities here in Wales. And they're not really getting much private sector funding, and they're relying heavily on the state. And most people in Wales don't really know this is happening. And you know, it comes back to this point I made earlier. A lot of those people, we've been for their websites, we've checked these people out, we've seen their LinkedIn profiles, we've seen their activity on social media. They are on the nationalistic left in Wales, and they're dominating public sector paying roles, very well paid roles, much more highly paid than the private sector here in Wales. And they're dominating public discourse at the price of the taxpayer. And we will be showing that.
Also, you know, with the media here in Wales, the Welsh media, you know, I've experienced, I don't know about you, but you've seen it as well. Sometimes the narrative, they don't tend to give any kind of platform to people who are centre right. It tends to be this socialist agenda, and it's something we've got to learn to live with in Wales. But we don't have to learn to live there. We can change it. And I think, you know, think tanks like yourself, Centre for Welsh Studies, and the team that you have there doing a fantastic job in just bringing things to the surface that people don't know about. For example, one of those things is universal basic income. Now, you've been quite strong about that. Tell us a little bit about that, Matt.
Well, there's quite a strong campaign by the left in Wales to bring in universal basic income, which I'm sure our listeners know what it is. If not, you know, go on Google and find out. But they are very influential within the policymakers in Cardiff Bay getting their agenda across. We've had people, I don't even need to name names, but prominent MPs and prominent Assembly members going out and discussing this online. Future Generation Commissioner for Wales has also been pushing this agenda. There's no one that's holding them accountable. I saw that Wales Online, when they did an article on UBI Wales, didn't even quote our paper, which was the only paper in Wales that actually said, how is this going to be paid for? Our calculations in Wales showed that it would cost at least £13 billion for the minimum scheme, which is nowhere near enough they need to do. So you're probably talking double that. The NHS budget for Wales is around £8 billion. So, where are they going to get this £13 billion from unless they're taxing people in Wales more? I can't see where they're going to get this money from. And, they're not being honest with the public. They're going to have to get in a lot of debt or increase taxes to pay for this.
Talking about increased taxes, Matt, you've been involved in a campaign recently, haven't you, on taxes? Tell us a bit about that, because I've seen some stuff on social media you guys have been doing, and I'm interested to know more. I'm sure that the viewers would be as well. Tell us a bit more about that, Matt.
We've launched a new campaign through our think tank, the Centre for Welsh Studies, called Taxed Enough Cymru. And it's basically raising awareness on what's happening here in Wales. As you said, the media in Wales are, in our opinion, of a certain disposition, and they're pushing a certain agenda from Cardiff Bay. There's constant talk about income tax rises, tourism taxes, road tolls being implemented, universal basic income. And the traction's only going one way. And there's no one in Wales fighting back and saying, we can't do this. Wales cannot afford any more tax increases. The public are already stretched. Businesses are struggling. Businesses are quite frankly failing due to partially to the closures because of COVID and lockdown as well, having a detrimental impact. And things really need to happen, to show there is an opposition to this. Thankfully, we've had good support. We've had really good numbers of politicians in Wales from both the Senedd and Westminster coming out and backing our campaign. We have more to be released. And I'm sure that over the coming months leading into the next Senedd elections, it will become quite a cross-party movement to oppose any tax increases post-Senedd elections in 2021.
Yeah, well, coming to that, Matt, if I recall correctly, there was, I think in 2011, the referendum that tax raising powers that they wouldn't be given to the Welsh government and they wouldn't be increasing taxes. I mean, that was part of what I understand back in 2011, but apparently that's all changed now. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think, to be honest with you, Wales has a brain drain. We have a huge issue with young people. I'm sure you've seen it in your area of Blaen y Gwent, and I've seen it here in Brecon and Radnorshire where I live. Young people fleeing as soon as they can. They go to university. A lot of them don't come back because there are no jobs in Wales for them to particularly come back to. The only place many of them go to is, frankly, Cardiff, is the capital. And we've seen it since devolution began, a sucking of all of our talent out of other parts of Wales and to the capital. And the Welsh government's sort of threats around tax, in my opinion, they are threats, doesn't really help us when we're trying to, bring these people, this talent back to Wales. We have an aging population. We have services that are going to struggle to have people that actually work in them to look after this older generation. Mid and North Wales especially have a seriously big issue with an aging population going forward. And there doesn't seem to be any vision within Wales to look at policies to implement to attract people back to Wales. And I think a low tax agenda could be the best way to bring people back to this country.
Absolutely, and it would bring investment into the area as well. I mean, one of the things that struck me today, a report by BBC Wales, actually, I was watching a little bit earlier today, that half of the households in Wales live in poverty. I mean, it's staggering to think that in 2021 that we've got so many people living under the poverty line here in Wales. I mean, you mentioned Blaen y Gwent, you mentioned the valleys. I mean, I lived and worked and played rugby and football up here and managed teams, whatever, for so many years. And the levels of deprivation here are appalling. And it strikes me sometimes, whether you're anti-devolution or not, irrespective, Welsh Labour have failed categorically, historically, institutionally. They have failed the people of Wales for so long, and people still vote for them. I mean, Matt, why do you think that is? Not just a generational thing. Are there other reasons for that?
I think it's very much a generational thing. I've spoken to councillors in places such as the South Wales Valleys who've told me, the voting turnout amongst young people is tiny in those constituencies, and the Labour Party there relies heavily on the older generations who are pretty much just anti-conservative voters to go out and turn out for them. I do think things are changing. We saw the Red Wall change in North Wales at the last election. We saw the Red Wall crumble across Northern England. I do think, maybe eventually in Wales that may happen. So I think we just got to wait and see, really, and see what other parties come into the fray. I think UKIP in 2015 were the first party in the UK the Conservatives have a lot to thank UKIP for here, to actually get a lot of Labour voters for the first time to vote someone other than Labour. They weren't ready to vote Conservative at that time in 2015, 2014 for the European elections as well. But they, for the first time, flirted with someone else in UKIP. And then in 2019, I think Boris made sure those votes came to him at the general election. Now they're away from Labour. So I think there is a trend moving away from Labour in their traditional heartlands.
I want to move the conversation on a little bit. We'll talk about the Senate elections a little bit towards the end, because I want to talk a little bit about the rebranding of the Brexit Party and how that affects the Brexit Party here in Wales, which is dissolved at the moment because Mark Reckless has left and the other three have gone a different way. But let's turn our attention, because obviously, we got the US elections that are absolutely, dominating the media and the news right now. I know the polls have suggested that Biden is ahead, but from experience, Hillary Clinton was ahead of the polls so much of the time. And yet, Trump won a landslide victory, in his last time running as the president. And I just wonder, who do you think's going to win this, Matt? I mean, I've seen Nigel Farage this week. He put a bet on, a 10 grand bet, 15-8 odds.
Mine's not far off that.
On Trump winning. I mean, I'd be lucky to put a tenner down, to be quite honest with you. That's the Welsh version of a big bet, 10 quid, mate, But yeah, I've seen the odds with all the bookies, 15-8. I mean, Trump is not favourite with the bookies.
No.
Biden is, but obviously that doesn't matter really, does it? Who do you think's going to... Because when I've looked at the ground campaign of Trump, it's massive. You see the crowds. He's been in Pennsylvania, Florida, he's been up in Minnesota, and they've been massive. And then you look at Biden's, and he's got his mother on the kitchen sink in there. And you think to yourself, I mean, have the polls got this drastically wrong here? Who do you think is going to win this election, Matt?
Trump. I think Trump will win this election. And I think it's been coming for years. I thought Trump was going to win in 2016. I thought Brexit was going to happen in 2016. A lot of the pollsters got it wrong then. I think they've got it wrong now. I mean, if you look at places like Pennsylvania, the polls just a few weeks ago were showing a 12 to 13 point lead for Biden. Today, they've narrowed down to 2%. And I honestly think the polls aren't pollsters anymore. Similar to the media in America, where you see them covering up a lot of the Hunter Biden stories that have been breaking. That should have decimated Joe Biden's campaign. That should have been him out of the race completely in any other traditional American election. But for some reason, a lot of the left and centre media out there have completely covered it up. But I think pollsters have sort of got a tactic they're playing here. They know that if they can say that Joe Biden's winning so heavily, a lot of the Trump support might not turn out. But I think actually it's spurred the Trump vote on, that for the last year or two, they've said Trump will never win re-election. He's hands down, going to be defeated. But I think it's worked the other way. I think it's encouraged his base so heavily. And like you said, the turnouts he's getting at his rallies compared to Joe Biden, the momentum behind his campaign, the ground games the Republicans and the GOP actually have in America, second to none. It's world class. It's almost unbeatable. The Democrats are up against it. So I do think Trump will win tomorrow. I do think he'll get a second term, 100%.
You mentioned the posters there. I noticed on social media this week, in fact, I think it was today, that you said that the posters are just propaganda for the government, and there's an element of truth in that, isn't it? Let's be honest. I mean, here in Wales, we have these Welsh polls by Roger Scully. We're supposed to have had one out today, but it didn't come. We'll all wait until about Tuesday, and they always seem to favour a certain narrative. I don't know if they poll the same kind of people, what the demographics are. I know there's a number of different polls that they pull from YouGov and Sturvation or whatever they call it. I mean, I'm not skilled in that field, Matthew, but do you think that sometimes polls are used to push a certain, it's propaganda really, to push a certain narrative within politics here in Wales as much as it is anywhere else?
I think polls very much rely heavily on the way in which the question is asked. I've conducted polling before through our Centre for Welsh Studies, and most people that would never question a Roger Scully poll, as soon as we released one, because it's our organisation, they instantly came out and said, "Oh, the way you've worded that poll has basically corrupted the data." And so people will sometimes listen to polling, and sometimes they won't. It doesn't really reflect. Polling. I think since about 2015 has been fairly off, and I think a lot of people have lost trust in polling. I personally have. I personally look at try and get a more of a groundswell opinion and follow both campaigns virtually and in person, speak to people I know that might be involved in the campaigns. But I honestly, polling, it's important and needs to be done, but I think a lot of it has become politicized.
Absolutely. Talking about polling, of course, we mentioned that Biden is ahead in the polls in the US. Who would be best for the UK? I mean, my opinion, I've made it very clear on this broadcast. I was speaking to Jack Ross from Turning Point last week or week before, actually, who was out in Arizona live at one of the rallies. And I think the best person for the UK would be Donald J. Trump. Simple as that, for a whole range of reasons. I think it was reported that Biden's not a great fan of Brexit, whereas Donald Trump is. I mean, so who do you think is best for the UK, Matthew, for this presidential election?
I think Donald Trump. I understand completely your point you've made there. The comments from Joe Biden and his campaign team that will technically be running America if he wins. If he wins, I'm wrong. In a few days' time, if he wins, I think they're going to take a much more European approach to how they treat the West and how they view the world. I think the UK could be potentially sidelined by the Biden campaign, whereas Trump's openly said, and I think even people that aren't fans of Trump, how he handles politics, they all know that Trump's a patriot when it comes to things like the UK. He really is a big sort of fanatic about the United Kingdom and its history and his links and his own family's links to the UK. But I think personally Trump will be good for us. There's a trade deal sitting there with America that I know is going to be quite a controversial one. I know that certain organisations around farming are going to be very queasy about food standards, etc. And there's already this whole chlorinated chicken scaremongering that's already going on. But I think definitely Donald Trump would be better for UK-America relations.
Well, I was interested to note that Farage would join Trump on the stage at one of his recent rallies and give a rousing 6-minute endorsement and speech. I thought he was very good. I enjoyed what he had to say. And of course, then on the back of that, I wondered if Trump's passion and his campaigning at the moment has persuaded Nigel to rebrand the Brexit Party, because as you know, as of today, both Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, the chairman of the Brexit Party, have stated and said that they're going to rebrand. They're going to launch the Reform Party. So, I mean, that's just this today. The news has been full of it. I know that Tice has been busy on the airwaves speaking to a whole lot of media outlets. What do you think about that? The Brexit Party. Let's talk about it nationally first, then we'll talk about the context in Wales. But this new party, do you think it's a right or a wrong move?
I think it's definitely scope nationally for reform. There is a chunk of the electorate who are very, very, very concerned about lockdown, its damages to the economy, to our mental health, the suicide rates, to cancer screenings not being conducted, and to a wide range of other issues that particularly have just been pushed back because of COVID and the way in which the government's policy making at a devolved and national level is affecting that. So I do think there is scope for them to go on sort of campaign against lockdown, because there is a chunk of the electorate that want that. If the government now in February and all the devolved nations would turn around and say we're not doing any more lockdowns, where would their scope be? That could be a potential problem for reform. But I'm not surprised at all that they've come back to the fray. I think Nigel is a natural campaigner. He's one of the best political orators the UK's ever seen. He knows how to be an outsider and still influence the British political scene. We saw in Wales in 2016 in the Assembly elections. They won 7 seats, I believe, in the Senate, in the Assembly. So he does know how to do it. And Wales is a place in which I think they could find electoral success if they were to push it, because of the voting system we have here at the Senate elections. It's not like first past the post in England. So it'll be interesting to see where they, as an organisation and a political party now, to go.
Yeah, because I listened to Richard Tice today, the chairman of the Brexit Party. He was stating that they're looking to stand in local elections, of course, which would include Wales and council elections in May next year. I just wondered, though, I've noticed there's been a bit of a backlash for Nigel. As you know, Nigel supported me in my campaign when I stood up the Brexit Party in 2019 election, so I got a lot of respect and time for him, and I think he's helped to change the landscape of politics here in the UK more than any other unelected politician I've ever met in my life, and I had the privilege of meeting him. But I wonder if it's too far this time, Matthew, just my opinion, whether or not this change is grasping at straws, given the fact that Lawrence Fox has launched a Reclaim Party. And there seems to be parties propping up everywhere a little bit at the moment. However, Nigel does have a way to get attention from the media. He does get given a platform because of who he is and what he's achieved, getting us out of the EU, which is a big part of it. I just wondered if it's too late, especially here in Wales's context, given that we're in an election cycle and in 6 months' time, in May next year, we'll be at the ballot box. Well, if they don't delay the elections, that is. Is it too late for the Brexit Party? We've seen what's happened in the Senate. We've seen the collapse of the Brexit Party. Mark Reckless, the party leader, leaving and joining the Welsh Assembly Party, and the other three going their own way. I just wonder if they have a political voice here anymore in Wales, given that the Brexit Party, in my opinion, Matthew, has fulfilled its mandate. It's done what it said on the tin and it's gone. I understand the need to rebrand because they want to be relevant, but is reforming a failing institution down at Cardiff Bay enough is the question, really. And is it too late now for the Brexit Party to really gain any grounds? I might be wrong. What do you think?
I think it'll be very interesting to see what their policies on devolution are when they announce a full slate of policies. I think, as you mentioned with Abolish, I think Abolish are going to pick up seats in 2021. I think there is a chunk of the electorate that is frustrated with how devolution's developed, and especially through COVID, with now there is a clear border between England and Wales for the first time in 400 years. Things are very different now. COVID's changed the whole political game. I do think Abolish will capitalise on that. But in terms of their policies, it all depends on what they stand on. I mean, do I think much of the electorate might even listen to Reform's policies? Probably not. If they have Nigel fronting their campaign in Wales, will that win them seats? Probably. So I don't think a lot of people will actually listen to a lot of the messaging. I think Nigel is such a formidable character. Whatever he does will gather a 5 to 10% vote maybe in Wales, as with your previous history of the Brexit Party. Personally, do I think that reforming the institution, the Conservatives are promising that, the Liberal Democrats are promising that, Plaid and Labour will probably always say, we can always do things better in Wales under devolution. There's going to be a very packed field in terms of trying to reform the Senedd and Abolish with a very clear message being at the top of the ballot paper that they are the only ones that want to dissolve the institution. So I think they have got a niche there and a narrative that will be very, very palatable to large sections of not large particularly, but solid sections of the vote. Yeah,
I'm finding that more and more. Our membership at the Abolish Assembly Party, I know this is rich politics, but I am a member of the party, as you know. I support, I'm getting rid of devolution because it's failed the people, for 2 decades. And, it's when I spoke to Mark Reckless a few weeks ago on Rich Politics here, we discussed a little bit about that, actually, how Mark, from the inside, as a Brexit Party MS, tried to change and reform things from within. It's almost impossible to change something that historically has been Labour-led since its inception, Matthew. And I think it's going to be very difficult for a party from the outside to come in, especially, as rousing and as exciting as Nigel is and as passionate as a speaker he is. And I'm not too sure he'll connect as well with the Welsh people this time as he did last time. That's just my opinion, and and I got a lot of respect for him. I just wonder if the message of reforming, because they haven't pitched what that is. We've made clear what we want to do. We don't have detailed manifesto, obviously, but we've said we want to get rid of the assembly. It's a long-term goal. It's not a short term. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. We understand that, but at least we know what our objectives are. We don't really know what their objectives are yet. They've only renamed themselves today. We don't know what they're going to do. I am friends with a lot of former Brexit Party candidates who may be standing for them in the future, but I just feel that they've come to the party a little bit too late.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from there. I personally see, for example, that for Abolish, I think next year is their UKIP 99 moment. They're going to make us a significantly small breakthrough into the electorate. The Senedd is going to expand by 2026. Whether, people on the Abolish and Conservative ranks oppose it, it will still have the numbers to get through, I believe, going forward. So the Senedd is going to grow going forward. Abolish's vote share, I believe, will continue to grow across Wales. Will they pick up maybe 12 to 15 seats in 2026 if they make a small breakthrough now? I think that's very possible. I think it's very possible. But like you said, I think we've got to wait and see where Reform's agenda for Wales will be. Because I think currently a lot of their talk they've been discussing really in the national media has been UK-wide rather than anything devolved.
Yeah, absolutely. We get to see them play their hand here in Wales, obviously. Matthew, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been fantastic. Our time is almost gone. But just let me ask you this. What's next for Matthew MacKinnon?
A lot of campaigns lined up with the Centre for Welsh Studies. I think 2021, the Senedd elections, will be a game changer in terms of the union for this country. I think if Labour and Plaid form a coalition, which could potentially happen, we're in uncharted territory, because I think maybe a referendum on Wales's position within the union may well be happening in the next 5 years. So in terms of the union, I think there will be a lot happening on that space over the next few months. So that's where it's going, I think.
Well, Matthew, Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it. And guys, if you want to know more about what Matthew and the guys at Centre for Welsh Studies are doing, please check them out on social media. I'm sure you'd, like me, appreciate some of their stuff they put out. Well, all of their stuff, I should say. And thank you so much for taking the time to tune in tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget to tune in every Wednesday and Friday night to Rich Politics. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button. Catch you next week on Rich Politics.